is is there anybody here that has uh, seen me give a talk before? And the reason I ask that is because I've pulled together some other the information from other talks that I've given, and I don't want to be really redundant, but there's some really practical and relevant information here, and so I want to make sure that I'm not, you know, rehashing something I've that I've uh, had them in the audience before. So looks like one maybe
Yeah, it
have
looks like
seen.
Mark has maybe seen you
uh,
speak before, but he's okay with the refresher.
Okay, that's
We've got some
great.
first timers too. So,
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, I do come to the West Side once in a while. I've been to the Country Living Expo and I've done a couple of talks in Tenino. Um, and it's always fun to go over there because it's so different than here on the east side, but there's many things that we can talk about and think about and study as far as cattle go that are it doesn't matter whether we're in the Midwest or Washington, Eastern Washington or Western Washington. A cow's rumen still works the same thing. It just kind of depends on what we put in it. So anyway, as we'll charge forth and we'll like I said, Claire will monitor the chat, and if there's questions, she can stop me and we'll just go down that trail if there's a chance to learn something. Okay, so let's look at a little bit of the context of of my approach for this talk. And on your side of the state, cool season perennial pastures are pretty much dominant. Uh, you get your spring flush and summer slowdown. I always think of how it rains over there all the time and everything, but I do come over in the summertime. My daughter lives in Gig Harbor, and it's surprising how dry it can get in the middle of the summer. So there is that summer slowdown, just like we have in Eastern Washington. You get uh, high rainfall. There's mild winters usually, but it can be different. We have a period of time on this side of the mountains where we just figure, at least at as far north as Wilburn, Davenport, and Okanagan country, that we're going to have to feed at least a portion of the winter. Whereas on your side, stockpiled forage and so forth may be a factor that we can work into our programs. Soil fertility has will have an effect, and the species you have, whether they're native or whether they are improved pastures with ryegrass and orchard grass, fescues, clovers, whatever. Those mixes will determine the quality. So we also have to think about the key production stages, and basically that would be late gestation. I'm talking about cows now. As we talk in the next webinar, we're going to be talking about finishing uh, cattle on grass or a hybrid of grass and grain or just grain, and so uh, things are a little bit different. But in the production cycle of the cow, we can think of it in terms of late gestation, early lactation, breeding, weaning, all those critical times during the production cycle when nutrient requirements change and how the animal utilizes their nutrients changes as well. Nutrient demand, we always have to think about early lactation as being a time when, there's a high demand for nutrients, and late gestation, even after that calf is weaned, there isn't pardon me, there is an increase in nutrient demand that peaks during that time as well. So the bottom line of that is, excuse me, the Eastern Washington allergies, um, timing of these stages relative to pasture growth is really important when we think about how those needs of the animals are being met. And if there's a deficit in nutrients, either it be energy or protein or whatever during any particular stage, then we can figure out how we're going to supplement those cows and and balance that diet. We don't have to uh, think of it in terms of we balance the diet just in a bucket uh, for a cow that's on a total mixed ration. We can balance diets as these cows are on in a grazing situation as well. So, uh, like I said, there's these stages and those nutrient requirements vary by the stage. So late gestation, um, that would be after the calf is, after her previous calf has been weaned, she has an increased energy requirement and needs more protein for fetal growth. Early lactation, when that new calf comes, high energy and protein demand, and milk production really drives that demand, and it drives the intake that cow needs in order to produce the calf. That that lactation curve peaks really early in that calf's life. And so if you can match the time when your forages, when your pastures are at their highest quality, then we can go a long ways toward meeting those requirements, even though the requirements are high for the cow at that time. Breeding, we're going to talk about body condition score uh, and how that's related to how that cow's ability to cycle and go through estrus. And we target a body condition score 5 to 6, but I'm going to talk about that more at length here in a few minutes. So we'll kind of hold that thought. And after weaning, in case I forget to say it, this is one of the most efficient times that we can get cows back into shape if they're on the thin side. It's one of the most, that time it takes less feed to try to get the cow back to increase the body condition score that she may have lost. It's typical for us to let cows cycle weight. If we tried to keep them in high body condition score throughout the year, it could turn into kind of an expensive proposition. But cows are resilient, and they do uh, cycle weight well. And so if they lose a little bit because of the demands from the calf during that uh, production cycle, with a little extra feed at strategic times, we can get those cows back in shape. Nutrient requirements, uh, those I'm just going to put up here. If there's any resource that I recommend for producers, is to buy this book, because it'll tell you a lot of what you need to know in depth, and it's all scientifically derived data and about all the key nutrients and how those that fits with the nutrient requirements of the cattle. So, and all different classes of cattle. It could be mama cows, it could be heifers, it could be uh, uh, young growing animals like steers, feedlot steers, or whatever. It's just a whole wealth of information. Okay, so let's talk about forage growth. I talk about being able to match forage production with the time when the cattle are uh, needing the most groceries, so to speak. And so if you look at this graph, basically the solid line is above ground growth and the dotted line is underground growth or root development. And so you can see in the summer, it's fairly low for both. But in the fall, we get that bump, usually due to increased moisture in the fall, that growth in both above and below ground biomass. And in the winter, of course, when it gets cold enough, the grasses just aren't producing as much, and so we don't expect a lot of growth there. But when we get into spring, you can see that we get a lot of above and below ground growth, and this is with spring calving cows. This is a nice thing because the highest nutrient demand for a spring calving cow due to the fact that she's lactating and trying to breed back and so forth is during that time when the forage production is the highest. And so that really helps us from the standpoint of uh, meeting those nutrient requirements. Now, if we, I'll talk a little bit about this now, but later we'll talk in more depth. If we go to a fall calving system, and I don't know whether you all are in fall calving systems or spring calving systems, but that shifts this whole nutrient requirement. Um, if you superimpose nutrient requirements over this forage growth, it would be the nutrient requirements would be at a time when there's not as much available nutrients from the forages. And so we have to think about that both from a economic standpoint and labor standpoint and and supplemental feed standpoint when we decide when we're going to have those cows calve.
So Mark said spring
Oh,
calving to match feed and growth in Port Angeles is April. I don't know. I think that was just a statement and not a question, but
absolutely, and
yeah.
that makes that makes really good sense. And that's what I'm, the idea that I'm trying to portray is that and I think what he's saying also is that Port Angeles, that would be April. Now in the Columbia Basin down by let's say Moses Lake or something, that might be March. And so you kind of have to fit that depending on where you are and how early, in other words, how early spring comes, so to speak. And so um, yeah, I think that's great input. Okay, let's see here. Forage quality drivers kind of depends on whether it's grasses or legumes. Legumes will definitely give us an increase in crude protein. Um, Stage of maturity, the quality declines with maturity, that your leaf to stem ratio goes down. Um, in a nutshell, as from starting of growth early in the year or after rain or something, your forage quality starts to decline. In other words, crude protein goes down and the fiber components will go up. And we'll talk here a little bit about measuring forage quality and forage testing and so forth. But I think it's important to understand that as that forage quality declines, how the animal utilizes it will change as well. Soil fertility and pH will affect the yield, nutrient concentration. My nephew stopped by this morning when I was giving my dog a run, and he was talking about his orchard grass hay that he had just cut, and he said, the He didn't put on all that much fertilizer, and that may have affected his crude protein content, which it can. So, um, grazing management is important. Resting the grass, the residual height that you leave helps preserve the quality. My colleague Steve Franson, some of some of you may have seen him come over to the west side and give talks on forages or pastures, and he's very much an advocate of leaving at least 4 inches, because not only does that help keep that pasture or range or whatever you've got these animals on, does it help keep it more immature and more vegetative, it also leaves enough of the crown where those and the the sugars are reside in order to help for regeneration of the grass. In other words, that grass, it'll help the grass come back faster than if you chop it off right at the ground. Doesn't matter whether you're cutting it with a swather, cutting it low, or whether you're grazing it off. If you can leave a little bit more, it will recover faster. This is just a little table here about forage quality, just kind of some general rules of thumb. Spring vegetative cool season grasses, very immature, very high in protein, even grasses. As those grass and the TDN is really high too. I mean, 60 to 68%. That's very high quality when you consider grasses. Midsummer grass, they get down there in that 6 to 10. Those grasses, if we cut them for hay, they'll be sufficient in quality, probably for pregnant, uh, non-lactating cows in the winter or so forth. But if you're got cows with calves on them that you're trying to feed, they probably wouldn't be quite enough protein there. And so then you have to think about still use them, but then you just have to think about supplementation. Grass clover mixes, those are awesome. I've raised a lot of those over on the east side. Alfalfa orchard grass mix under irrigation works really good over here, and it's really a high quality feed, and you can even use it after those cows calve. Okay, so
I'm gonna
yes,
interject. Can you go back to that slide?
I can. Yes,
And a couple things. Can you explain what we know that CP is crude protein? What does
yes.
TDN stand for?
Oh, total digestible nutrients. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, no worries.
Okay, and so basically that is just a um, measure of the digestibility. Okay. And so, but it only accounts for fecal losses, right? If we get into, I know this is maybe beyond what we're talking here today, but if we get into the net energy system, then it accounts for uh, more energy losses, such as urinary energy loss, fecal loss, just the heat of digestion loss, and gaseous losses, the loss of energy just coming out of the animal in methane or
Okay.
CO2. So, but this only accounts for, this is just the difference between what goes in the front end of the cow and what comes out of the back end of the cow. Now,
Okay.
what happened to it, what happens to it when it's in the cow, it's more complex, but this just gives you an idea about about how much of that stays in the animal,
Okay.
and with the understanding that it's not 100% efficient on what stays in there either, because there's going to be those other losses as well.
Yeah.
Okay, very good question. Thank you.
Yeah, and then Mark pointed out too, that recommendation of taking the cattle off of grazing pasture when they graze it down to 4 inches, taking them off before they graze it down lower. That really helps with parasite management as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, good, very good point. Awesome. Any other questions? or comments?
Doesn't look like it right now, but feel free, folks. Anything that comes up.
Sure. Okay, so in ruminant nutrition, do we feed the cow or do we feed the bugs? This is one of the first questions you get asked in grad school, and some of the new grad students can't even answer it. Well, the answer is it's the bugs. And there's all of these different microbes that are in the rumen, and and they vary. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, there's cocci, those are the round ones. Bacilli are the rod shape. There's even some that are kind of like a corkscrew. This big guy right here is, of course, is a protozoa. And I'm going to throw out the the question. What's this thing right here? This wasn't discovered till about the 1970s. That is a flagellated anaerobic fungus.
Whoa.
And that is actually will uh, contribute to some fiber digestion in the rumen. What's this right down here on the belly of the protozoa? I guess that's a belly because they don't really have a head. They just got and they don't have a head or eyes or anything. But what is that on the belly of the protozoa? Those are actually bacilli, rod-shaped bacteria hitching a ride. And so the point I make when I show this slide to audiences is that there's a lot of interactions that go on between these different microbes. And some of them do what we call cross feeding. The byproduct of one microbe might be taken up by another microbe for its benefit. So not only is there a synergistic or symbiotic relationship between the cow and the bugs themselves, but there's also sometimes a relationship between the bugs within the rumen. And so the other thing and that's relevant here is that the 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 relative numbers and types of rumen microbes that are in the rumen are directly related to the kind of feed the animal is eating. For example, if I have a cow out on pasture eating an all pasture diet and then bring her in and give her a little bit of grain over time, and it might take a couple of weeks or something, then she will increase the number of microbes in the rumen that are starch digester, which would help her digest the corn, because uh, and then we get what we call the VFA shift. The VFAs, volatile fatty acids, are the byproducts of ruminal digestion, and the animal can use those for energy at the cellular level. Well, they what happens is they shift towards these bacteria so that they can digest the starches in the grains, and then those microbes may change the type of VFAs that are produced, and then that also has an effect on the pH of the rumen and all of those type of things. And so in other words, what the animal eats determines which microbes predominate in the rumen. If they have a little bit of grain and a lot of forage, there's still going to be a lot of the forage bugs there, but you just have to realize that they do shift so that there's some there that have the affinity for the grains. So those rumen microbes have nutrient requirements just like the animal. Okay. And if they
Okay.
don't have Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. Just Mark said, I guess the moral of this story is that you cannot transition an animal too fast from one type of feed to another. And he sees that issue with meat goats, that
A-
like drastic switch. I think he's
a-
saying.
Absolutely. We don't trans transfer from one different type of one class of feed to another just for that reason. That's why we have transition diets when these steers and heifers go to a feedlot. They come from a backgrounding operation on a high fiber diet, and they've got to be put on this on a step up diet and a finishing diet slowly, so that the rumen has time to adapt to it. Very good point. On this slide, the only reason I I put this up here and I want to make one point is when when an animal, a ruminant consumes organic matter, there's a certain amount of protein in there, and and it's important to note that some of that protein degrades in the rumen, and the nitrogen from that protein gets incorporated into the ruminant microbes as they're going through their life cycle. And so that ruminally degradable protein turns into microbial protein. And the protein requirement of the cow or the steer or whatever is met in two different ways. Microbial protein, as these microbes die off and are fleshed out of the rumen, they're digested just like any other protein that goes into the small intestine. Anything that's not any protein that's not degraded in the rumen is what we call bypass protein or ruminally undegradable protein, and it's digested just like you and I would in the small intestine as well. So they have two sources of their to meet their protein requirements, and that's microbial protein and bypass protein.
Don, we had a question.
Yes,
Candace asked, can this information be also translated to dairy cows? I know they have slightly different needs, such as milk production versus putting on weight.
absolutely yes. The rumen still works the same way. It's just that we feed a different kind of diet to the dairy cow. And so, or if it's a dairy cow that's on an all pasture diet, the dynamic would be very similar to the beef cow that's on an all forage diet. Okay. Did I say that right? The dairy
Like
what
a,
I meant what I meant was is that the dairy cow that's on an all pasture diet or all forage diet would be much like the beef cow, but the demands are so high for a dairy cow that the nutrient requirements. I've got, that green book I showed right here on my desk. I've got the nutrient requirements for dairy cows, and it's a brown book, and it's just as thick as the other one. And so it's just different classes of animals in the dairy NRC. You'd have growing heifers and transition cows, and those type of classes rather than um, than the classes of cattle that we've already discussed. So if you're interested in the dairy part of it, yeah, that's we can discuss that, but that's a whole different uh, priority for nutrients. Okay. All right. So let's biological priority for nutrients. I usually throw this slide in on for audiences that I think are fairly new to my talks and so forth. So I'm gonna throw out a question for you. When cows are in acceptable body condition, the nutrients are partitioned, and and so Where do those nutrient goes go first? Anybody got a guess? What has to happen first?
Mark said liver.
I'm thinking more big picture. Um, just in general.
Daily energy needs is what Candace guessed.
Okay, we're getting closer. Well, I think if maybe I'll prime the pump here
Fat.
just a little. Maybe I'll prime the pump here
Okay.
just a little bit, and then you'll see where I'm going with this. The very first thing is the nutrients are gonna go for maintenance. Okay, so if that animal is just in a quiescent state, just kind of hanging out, laying there, it's still expending energy just to stay alive, right? And so basically, and you can measure that. The classic example is to take a hamster, put it in a box that has instruments to measure heat, and the resting heat that comes off of this hamster is the energy required for maintenance. Okay? So, maintenance is number 1. Now let's go to number 2. What what uh what priority would be the second in the list? Okay. Well, I'll tell you. Number 2 is growth. Okay. So, uh, first thing that animals has to do is it has to survive. Next thing is it grows. Now, this cow right here was one of mine a good number of years ago, and she is first calf heifer. She's got that great big old calf there. Okay, so she's out eastern Washington on crested wheatgrass. She's got a tremendous amount of demands on her right at that, and lots of biological stress, right? And so she what is she trying to do? She's a young cow. She's trying to grow. What's she trying to do? She's trying to produce milk for that big old calf. Okay. And so that's third in line of priorities. Now, what do you think's fourth? And herein lies the problem. The fourth thing is reproduction. And then after all of that's taken care of, then she can build body reserves. All right. So, so this cow is a classic example of the type of cow that is most at risk for reproductive failure. Because, I mean, when you think about the economics of raising cattle, if you can feed them economically and you can get them to reproduce, in other words, breed back, you've gone a long ways toward your uh, efficiency and your productivity and your profitability and so forth. But this cow here is the classic example. The one is most at risk, and it's these young cows that we have to think about uh, to maybe give them a little extra care so that we make sure that they do breed back. Okay. Okay. So reproduction is this is the implications of all that. Reproduction is low priority from the animal standpoint, but from a producer standpoint, it's really high on the list. And um, so those nutrient deficits redirect nutrients away from reproduction. And if that and when you think about that cow, you know, we used to say, oh, we might get a couple $1,000 in a for buying a heifer or raising our own heifer. We might get a couple $1,000 invested in that cow before she ever has her first calf at 2 years old. Well, now with the inflated price of cattle and feed and all of those things, we're probably talking more like $3,000 or $4,000, 3,000, $3,500 to get a cow into production. And every one of those that we can keep in the herd without um, that reproductive failure and having to cull her, that is really a protection of the original investment in those heifers. And so really important from a producer standpoint. Um, Rumen function, diet selection. Uh, we talked about that need for rumen microbes to meet their requirements for energy and degradable protein. And the other thing I want to point out too is that these animals, they aren't out there just grazing with reckless abandon. They're out there, you see that prehension of them grazing. They're actually selecting a diet that's that maximizes the quality uh, that's out there. And so um, we we we've observed, and I've looked in the literature, and if you because I did a diet selection study when I was doing my master's degree a long time ago, and if you look at the data of these diet selection studies, these animals, if you put them out even on a monoculture of grass and you graze and then you bring them in and you evacuate them and take all these diet samples, they're actually collecting a diet that's probably 3 percentage points higher or more in protein than if you just went out there and clipped the samples of grass. And so my point is that they're actually trying to select a diet that's the highest quality they can get, and they're able to do that through the way that they sense the quality of the grasses and so forth. So,
We have a
yes,
question.
uh-huh.
This one's from Mark. So I know that to push efficiency, it is easy to breed heifers too soon. But waiting for her to build more growth, will it build long-term benefits, i.e., be a long-term reproducer? And he's
Um,
wondering long-term benefits versus short-term gains.
okay, so there was a time when back in um I guess you could say probably in the 80s, when there was uh, a change in cow type, and some of these animals were um, in the like in purebred Herefords and Angus and stuff like that. We were in the Hereford business, and some of those people, in order to get those cattle to grow to their maximum size and everything, they might not breed them to calve till they were 2.5 or something like that. And it was my observation, and I don't have data to support this other than personal observation, was that those cattle didn't ultimately do better than those that were set to calve at just 24 months, uh, or thereabouts, give or take a month or two. And so I think that ultimately it's not a benefit from the standpoint of being a long-term producer. It was my experience too that sometimes they got a little too fat when they were held to calve at 2.5. And so my suggestion would be that calving at 2.5, but yet be able to divide the herd so that those young animals get the benefit of some extra feed if they get to be a little too thin. Does that help? And was I on target of the question that you asked? I thought I understood it.
So you're saying that the long-term benefit of holding the the cow, um, versus is it like outweighs the short-term gain of breeding them at two. That's what you're saying?
No, I'd
Or
say
is it the
that
opposite?
I'd say I would always have them at about 24 months and not hold them.
Okay, got it.
If they're not good enough to calve at 24 months, I don't think there's any point in holding them to calve to 20 to 2.5 because uh it was my personal uh observation that it didn't help.
Okay.
But you have to be willing if they get a little bit too thin to give them a little extra feed to get them built back so that they breed back when they're in that for their first or breed back for their second and their third calf
Okay.
because they're still growing at that time, you know.
Yeah.
So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, and yeah, I can see his comment there at the
Yeah.
end. So okay. Then we already talked about the adequate residual height. I've got to move forward here. Rotate based on plant recovery. That's what we talked about too, not grazing too short so that the plant can recover. Avoid grazing on saturated soils to prevent pugging, stem da stem stand damage. I'll give you an example of pugging if you don't know the term. So many years ago, the vet came to our ranch to look at a cow or something. I don't remember what the vet was there for, but he left the gate open. And so the cows found the open gate and they decided to leave the premises and head down the dirt road to the south, which led right to the golf course. And so when the cows got to the golf course, they, of course, walked on the greens, and a perfect example of those tracks in the pugging. And so the only thing that saved us was is that the night after the cows were there, the kids went out and drove on the greens, and so we were saved. And they were more mad at the kids than they were at the cattle. And so we provided the labor and the gates to put a fence across that old dirt road, and so that the cows never got there again, and then they were happy. So, but moral of the story is don't let watch to make sure the vet closes the gate, and they should know better. Okay, let's go. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about grazing and forage quality. Okay. And then we're going to talk about body condition score. Uh, Proper rest, increase that leaf to stem ratio, which also will be reduce the fiber component or make the fiber component lower. And then also that has an increase in digestibility. And I'm going to talk about the relationship about intake and digestibility when I get to talking about the forage quality here in just a minute. Overgrazing accelerates the maturity, which can reduce crude protein and intake. And it's just a matter of timing to preserve those nutrient values. Remember, we do it on a calendar. Don't do it on a calendar. We do it on the condition of the grass. Body condition scoring, you know, is a great way to look at differences in the relative condition that's on those cows. And I always tell audiences and my students in Pullman and everybody, but you got to understand that body condition scoring is not set to an absolute standard. And so what I mean by that is that if uh you have one neighbor over here, body condition scores all his cows, and they come out with an average of 5.5. Neighbor number two over here may body condition score his cows, and they're actually thinner. Or no, let's say they're actually fatter, but maybe he comes out with the average body condition score across all these cows of a 5.0. It's not to compare your cows with your neighbors. What it is to compare the relative differences within your own herd. And so, therefore, um, the what you what your standards are in your mind as you body condition score, and there's all kinds of different explanations. And this one right here from the Noble Research that's on the screen, I know it's too small, you can't read it, but there's plenty of stuff out there on the internet about how to body condition score. But it's basically just to tell you where these animals are within your herd and the relative differences, so you can divide these cows up, and those little cows that need a little extra feed and so forth. You get that. Um, I always give the example. We had a cow in our herd that Hereford cow, bought her as a heifer, and she uh, uh, was in our herd for 16 years. Okay. She had 14 calves, as I remember. And of those 14 calves, 13 were heifers and one bull. And most every one of her heifers made it back into the herd. And so, and she was also a cow that was always fat, always produced a lot of milk. But if we tried to feed range cube cake out in the field, in the stubble, after grain harvest and so forth, she just turn up her nose and walk away. She didn't like it, but she could always keep herself in good condition. Not all cows are like that. She was an exceptional example of what you want a cow to be, and what you want her daughters to be like. And so I went through and I made beef cows are scored on a 1 to 9 scale, and I made with AI. I'm not good at AI yet, and I'm not talking about artificial insemination. I'm talking about artificial intelligence. I made a series of cards, and I'm going to show them to you here in a minute, of body condition score and what those look like. And then I can go and time lapse through these, and you can see how the body condition score increases as we put fat on these animals. And so here's body condition score 1. And I'm going to come back, but I'm just going to go 1 through 9, and you can see how that fat increases. And then you can ask questions if you like. 2, 3, 4. Now it's getting where about what we can live with. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So this is supposed to be the same cow, but just in different body condition, right? Okay. If we feed to 9 or 8, we're probably going to spend a whole lot more money than we need to. Where we want to be is somewhere in that 5 to 6 range. If we get down in the 4, we probably need to give that animal a little extra feed. 3 also, little extra feed, and get them back in that 5 to 6 range by the time of calving or to breed back. So, any questions about that? There's I'll go on to the next slide. This is how body condition score is associated with body fat. So those cows that are in that body condition score 5 to 6, you're looking at about 18.5 to say 22.5% body fat. Okay. And so as you can see, when you get down there in those 1s and 2s, they're practically devoid of fat. There's just not a lot of reserve there in order pull them through when the times get tough, so to speak. And they do get tough over here on this side of the state for sure. So, um, anyway, that's where they are associated with fat. Breeding, we target 5 to 6, calving, weaning greater than or equal to 5. And I also mentioned that the most efficient time to build back body condition is after these animals are weaned. And traditional weaning would be in around that 7 months, 7 to 8 months. Although you can do it earlier if you want to. In fact, you can early wean beef calves at 90 days or 100 days if you want to, but that's a whole other uh, situation where you got to provide feed for them and so forth. But you can build body condition scores in those cows if they're under tough conditions like drought or whatever. Okay. Let's see. I already said this body condition 5, heifers maybe need a little bit more, so they have a little bit more cushion there when they start losing body condition after the calve. Pregnancy rates, body condition score 3, you might expect just something over 40%. Pregnancy rates 5, you're up in that 85% range, and you get into 6, 5 to 6 is that 85 to 93%. And that would certainly be acceptable, especially in the Pacific Northwest. If you think about cattle in the southeastern United States, where they have a lot of Brahman or Bos Indicus influence and a high humidity and so forth, there's data that comes out of those places that are just scary. They have 50% pregnancy rates and so forth, but it's hard to breed cattle when it's so hot and humid. Let's see. I think we pretty much talked about this, but you got to have that condition so that uh, you get a short enough interval to that first estrus after calving. I mean, there can be a short heat, that maybe is a week after calving, but that uterus is not back into shape in order to conceive uh, reliably that soon. But you got about 90 days to get her bred back so that you have a calf during the course of 365 days. Uh, so in that first month to 2 months, you probably get bred back if they're in good body condition. Okay, this spring versus fall calving. I talked about that a little bit, how that shifts your nutrient requirements relative to the forages that are out there in your pastures. Um, Spring calving aligns with peak lactation for that spring forage and often lowers the feed costs. Fall calving, you know, uh, the calves come in September, October, and then all of a sudden wintertime comes and you're feeding the cow and the calf's going to need some extra. But there's reasons to do that. I have probably 70% or 80% of my producers here in Eastern Washington are spring calving people, but I have some really good friends that do have fall calving herds, and they like that from the standpoint of market timing because they're able to have another group of calves ready to go when there's not a lot of cattle on the market like there is in the fall. And so there's a reason to do it. You just have to go into it with an open mind and say, okay, I want to have a cattle ready when the market needs them. I'm going to have to feed them a little bit more, but maybe I'll get a good price. and you just have to manage around that. Uh, int the integration of reproduction and nutrition, energy and protein deficits uh, can delay that return to estrus and lower the conception rates. Mineral balances, I don't have enough time to talk minerals. I mean, that's a whole nother lecture, but I'll give a couple of comments here in a minute. Uh, uh, Body condition score to maintaining at breeding to maximize pregnancy rates. I will say that when you look at forage nutrition, there's a producer's perspective and me as a nutritionist, a perspective. A lot of producers just look at the physical characteristic. Is that hay nice and green and so forth, and that can contribute to the quality of the hay, but the chemical composition tells a story. And basically, where I'm going with here is that you got to know what you have before you know what you need. That's what I tell my students all the time. And so forage testing is critical in order to know what you have so that if there is going to be some nutrient deficits, then you can go ahead and get uh, supplementation programs to, really balance up those diets and uh, and get the most out of your hay or whatever else you're feeding, and meet those production goals, whether it's for a cow calf or whether you're feeding uh, a grass-fed beef program or whatever. Forage chemical composition, that this is the information that you get from your forage testing. Uh, just it'll tell you, if your forager are going to meet your production goals and you can correct for those imbalances. Typically, at the minimum, I ask when I get forages tested, I want dry matter and crude protein, and then they'll give a estimation of ruminally degradable protein versus ruminally undegradable protein. Or for those of us who are older, we used to, back when I was at Oklahoma State, uh, way back when, degradable intake protein versus undegradable intake protein. Those are just synonymous with RDP and RUP. So NDF and ADF, neutral detergent fiber. It's one of those fibrous portions of the plant, and it's got a pretty good relationship with intake. And we can calculate intake from NDF. ADF, acid detergent fiber, has a good relationship with digestibility, and we can use it to estimate digestibility. Anti-quality components, that would be things like lignin and silica and those type of uh, things that are in the plant, they're undigestible. So the more anti-quality components we have, the less digestibility that plant will be. And some of those anti-quality components, for example, lignin, they can also have physical and chemical barriers to digestion or degradation by the rumen microbes. And so that can be a significant thing we have to think about as well. Total digestible nutrients, we talked about that. And then the net energy system, where it counts for more of the energy losses. This right here is a chemical composition table for alfalfa hay and wheat straw. And I show this to my students, and I give them an example of how I think in terms of what's the difference between alfalfa hay and wheat straw. We know alfalfa hay is way better quality than wheat straw, but why? Because let's let's just say for discussion purposes, in one hand I have a pound of alfalfa hay, and in the other hand I have another pound of alfalfa, or other hand I have a pound of wheat straw. If we combust those, in other words, just burn them and then measure the amount of heat released, let's just say for discussion purposes, they both give off the same amount of heat. Okay, so that said, why is one better feed than the other? Because basically all we want to do is provide energy for that animal, right? But the difference is how much of that energy is retained in the animal. We can see that the crude protein content is significantly different, 17% versus 3.5%. The neutral detergent fiber is way higher in the wheat straw, which also means that the acid detergent fiber, which is related to digestibility, is also going to be higher because it's a subset of NDF. It's not on here. They have both about the same amount of lignin. That's any quality component. But look at total digestible nutrient. All this tells you is that you would estimate with alfalfa hay that about 40% of that alfalfa hay is going to come right out the back end of the cow. Okay. Only only about 60% is retained. And that's a high quality feed. If you look at wheat straw, you'd say about 59% of that is going to come right out the back end of the cow. Okay. And so they how that cow reacts to that and how they utilize it is the difference in why one feed is better than the other. And you go down here in this net energy for maintenance, you know, there's about twice as much net energy for maintenance in the alfalfa as the wheat straw, and what over 6 times more net energy for gain in the alfalfa hay, just because more of that energy is retained in the animal. And so I think it kind of gives a good um, inkling as to the why one's better than the other. The other thing I want to point out too is if you get a forage quality test, you'll get these are just nothing more than predicted values for net energy that come from equations based on your feed. And when you get those and you look at that and you say, well, what is where was this derived from? A lot of those equations are for alfalfa, and a lot of them are for dairy. And they never tell you where those equations came from. So those net energy values are relative values for different kinds of feed, but they're not really um, always applicable to the type of animal that you have. Uh, Forage quality. I want to. Sorry about my squeaky chair here. The crude protein uh, content of about less than 7% of dry matter is what we consider a low quality forage for beef cows. And basically, I know I've got to move on here so I can get through all my slides, but if you look at this breakpoint, this is what we call breakpoint analysis. There's a positive response to providing a high protein supplement when the forage quality is less than uh, about 7% right here at this, right here at this green line. And what that tells you is that as you add protein, intake of those cattle go up until you get about to 7%. And so how this works is that with a pregnant non-lactating cow, they'll get along pretty well after calving, or I'm sorry, after weaning, when they're not lactating, with a forage that's about 7% crude protein. But as they get closer to calving and the demands for the fetus increase, and then if you get after calving, they're going to require more protein because of the demands from lactation. But that's how we arrive at the idea that a 7%, less than 7% crude protein is probably a low quality forage. Let's see. We talked about the different stages, uh, low nutrient demand, early gestation, mid gestation. Organs are starting to grow, and the placenta. About 75% of that fetal growth is happening in the last 50 to 60 days. And with a calf, if you think about it right there at the last couple, 3 weeks before calving, those calves are going to gain probably a pound a day inside the cow. And so the demands are high. And also, if we make mistakes giving too much energy at that time, we might get a really big calf and have calving problems and so forth. And then we get up to where we're really close to calving, and that calf is displacing so much space inside the cow that then her intake goes down just because she doesn't have as much room for the feed to be stored in the rumen. And so as we get close to calving, we'll see intake go down. I really need to put a slide about that intake in my presentations because it's quite significant. Not going to talk a lot about minerals. I will say there's so many interactions, and that's why I've got the little guy up here gagging, and that's why I didn't go into mineral nutrition when I was learning to be a ruminant nutritionist. I went the energy and the protein route, but there's lots and lots of interactions. Um, and what I will say about this, though, is that not all mineral preparations are created equal. If you go to the feed store and you say, I need minerals for my cows, what they should be asking you is, well, are your cows um, dry cows? Are they lactating? Are you getting ready to breed those cows or whatever? Each of those different parts in the production cycle need a different type of mineral. It'll have a different blend for what you're trying to achieve. So not all, and if you're feeding out some steers on grain, that takes a whole nother type of mineral because of the calcium phosphorus ratio and so forth. And so I just caution you, if you have any questions about that, then you should call call me or your local extension person or somebody, and we'll help walk you through that. Selenium is a classic example too of mineral needs. In the blue, as you can see, that's extremely low. Eastern Washington is really low in selenium, and we see selenium deficiencies over here in lambs and calves, white muscle disease in both lambs and calves. And as you can see up here in the north or in the western part of Washington state, some of you all are in pretty good shape, way better than we are over here. What compounds our problem is especially like out on our ranch when I was growing up, is we were raising our hay on site in areas that were low in selenium, feeding that to our cows, which were already selenium deficient. So we'd have to provide supplemental selenium a couple of times a year um, in the form of injectables and so forth to make sure that we didn't have well, in mama cows, you'll see reproductive issues, like retained placentas and not breeding back. But if you provided that the selenium, you could head that off. And then also if the mama cow's selenium status or the ewe was in good shape, then in all likelihood you wouldn't have too much troubles with white muscle disease. But we did give that give selenium injections to both lambs and calves at birth as well. But just remember that you got to match uh, your um, your selenium or I mean match your mineral to what you're trying to do. Let's see. I think I can see a question in.
Yeah, Mark said buying Eastern Washington alfalfa, you have to be careful about selenium deficiency. You need mineral supplements with selenium.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the problems too with mineral supplementation, for example, using uh, a mineral preparation, it's just a dry mineral, is a lot of times you can't get enough selenium by law in a dry mineral to meet the needs of the to get those animals status back. And so that being the case, we had to do injectables.
Oh,
And so, but on the western side of the state, you're all in the transition zone over here, by the sound and so forth. And so you'd have to work with your vet to be sure you knew exactly what your status was. So,
no.
oh wow, I'm actually going to make it. I've got probably 5 minutes.
Okay.
Is that gonna be okay?
Yeah, folks can leave with if they got to take off. I'll provide the recording and everything, but yeah, keep going.
Okay. So why do we supplement? So first scenario is performance is not meeting production goals. That could be body condition, score, gain, or whatever. Adequate, there's adequate quantity of forage, and that's a key uh, component here is that supplementation with low levels of protein doesn't work if you don't have adequate forage, adequate base forage, and the forage quality is low. Okay, so this bar chart uh, shows on the left side the percent of desired nutrient intake. The red is the forage alone, and the green is the supplement. So in this case, you could consider this a protein supplement, and you can see that a little bit of protein supplement here also gave an increase in nutrient intake in the red, which tells you that unlocked the potential uh, of the grass just by giving a small bit of protein supplement. And so I think uh, this would be the absolute most efficient scenario you could have for supplementing a low quality forage, in that basically just a little bit of supplement, you got the extra. There's that inexorable link between protein and energy, because if those rumen microbes are made happy by the protein supplement, then they did a better job of digesting the forage and you got more energy out of the forage. So that's how that works. But as you can see, if you didn't have adequate forage, there wouldn't be any energy to unlock out of that forage.
Mm.
Scenario number two, forage availability may or not be limited, forage not meeting production goals, and production goals are greater than can be achieved by available forage. In that case, you're getting about 80% of your desired intake from your forage, and your increase in your nutrient intake is from the supplement itself. It didn't really unlock anything. It just provided extra nutrients and so forth. I want to go back really quick. This, in some of my research, I've found that this had what we call a gross supplementation efficiency. We talk about feed efficiency, pounds of feed per pound of gain. Gross supplementation efficiency of this compared with unsupplemented animals was about 2.5 or 2.8 to 3.2 to 1. In other words, that's saying it takes about 2.5 to 3 pounds of feed per pound of additional gain in a mama cow over the winter. And what is the feed efficiency of a feedlot steer? 5 or 6 to 1. I'll take that 2.5 to 3 pounds of feed per pound of gain anytime. That's why I was saying how efficient that is when you can unlock the energy out of that feed. So anyway, this one here, we talked about this. Uh, that the supplement is providing uh, the extra nutrients. The third scenario is forage is limited by season or drought. Forage intake may be limited or limited forage intake may be desired in addition to maintaining total energy intake. So in this case, maybe you want to increase stocking rate or you want to extend your grazing season. And so this in this case, maybe you're getting 100% of your nutrient intake uh, just from the grass alone. But what we call this now here in the green is the substitution effect. In other words, by providing that supplement, we depress the need for the other forage. And so therefore, we can extend the grazing season or increase stocking rate or whatever under under those conditions. So is there any questions about those three different scenarios? If not, the key takeaways, you all can will have access to these slides, but we just talked about the body condition score and the importance of resting the pastures to keep it immature as we rotationally graze so that the more immature it is, the higher quality, the higher digestibility. And if we don't graze it too short, then it'll recover faster. Plan calving seasons to match the forage calendar and labor, or the available forage, harvested forages maybe that you have if you're going to try to do fall calving and handle those animals over the winter. And then using the targeted supplements to reduce the winter costs. So anyway, that's what I've got for you today. And it's just been a pleasure to be able to visit with you. And I hope that I was able to give you some information that was useful. And I look forward to seeing you again sometime and also doing another one of these in the not too distant future.
All right, thank you so much, Dawn. Do folks have any questions? You can either put it in the chat. Looks like most folks had to take off, but you're welcome to unmute or put it in the chat. Yeah, there's all sorts of information in there that was so new to me. Um, yeah, thank you so much, Dawn. That was great.
Oh, oh, you're welcome. It's
Yeah.
my pleasure. And thanks everybody for coming.
All right, thank you everyone. And I'll send a follow-up email including these slides and everything. All right, Kaylee, we'll see you next week at the webinar on Tuesday night.
That's right. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you. We'll see you all next time.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.